5 minutes past 10. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You're with me, Sandra Twin-Audio. Now, in the simplest of terms, the world at large already has enough wrongs. So how about we have quite a number of rights going well for us as a country? And this is just a layman's explanation of human rights. Today, Uganda joins the rest of the world to celebrate the International Day of Human Rights. This day is very important to all humanity, and it is a landmark day for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it was adopted in 1948. So Uganda is one of the 192 member states across the world which ratified UDHR and has therefore made commitments to adhere to the international human rights standards. But is this so? If you are asked today, would you agree that as a country we are doing so well to see the human rights of every citizen catered for? So we want to find out how we are performing. A very warm welcome to today's dialogue. The international theme for this year is reducing inequalities, advancing human rights, and the national theme is rebuilding better, resilient institutions that are key to COVID-19 recovery. So we'll be discussing this further in a bit. We do recognize our partners, Uganda Human Rights Commission, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Uganda, and also the German-Uganda Development Cooperation, and of course the civil society, including the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, Barefoot Law, Justice Behind Bars, and Refugee Law. So the hashtag today is Human Rights Day UG21 and Stand Up for Human Rights. Do be part of this conversation. We are in the COVID-19 pandemic, and we do know that a number of human rights violations have been observed, and we want to hear from you as we celebrate this day. What are some of the key aspects of our day-to-day life that we should be respecting and paying attention to? Now, to start our conversation right away, we do have our guests who are in studio, and we also have those that are joining us on Zoom, and I want to believe that we can all hear each other and see each other so that we have this very good dialogue on this very Friday. I want to quickly invite the German ambassador to Uganda, His Excellency Matthias Schauer, and he will be giving us his brief remarks on this day. He has been in Uganda for, say, a year. I think from what I discovered, it's been a year. So we want to understand from his interaction with Ugandans as we celebrate this day, what are some of the key things that are standing out for him. Your Excellency, I want to believe you can see and hear me. A very good morning, and thank you so much for being part of this dialogue.
Thank you very much. Chairperson of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, Honorable Miriam Wangadia, and the members of the Commission, Secretary, Directors, Regional Heads and Staff Members, UN Resident Coordinator, dear Susan Ngongi Namondo, Head of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Robert Kuchani, Principal Judge, Honorable Dr. Flavian Zeija, Chairperson of the Human Rights Committee of Parliament, Honorable Fox Odoy, fellow heads of diplomatic missions, heads of members of civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Mwasuza Mutia, Mwebala Okunchaza. I am greatly honored to speak to you today on the occasion of the International Human Rights Day and to address key representatives of Uganda's governmental institutions, as well as from civil society organizations, which stand up every day for the promotion and protection of human rights in Uganda. We observe Human Rights Day on 10th of December to commemorate this day in 1948, when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a milestone document. It proclaims nothing less than the inalienable rights that every human being is entitled to, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, language, nationality, origin, or opinion. When the Assembly adopted the declaration, it was proclaimed as a, quote, common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, towards which individuals and societies should strive by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance, end of quote. The two words universal and inalienable are particularly important to me. Let me explain. It is my firm belief that human rights should be at the very heart of all our actions, no matter whether in Germany or in Uganda, in Washington or in Ouagadougou. If somebody is beaten or imprisoned without having violated any law, then this is universally considered to be fundamentally wrong in any society, whether in developing or industrialized countries, whether in small, homogeneous or large multicultural societies. Ladies and gentlemen, turning to Uganda, let me assure you, as somebody who has studied constitutional law, that Uganda's constitution is a very fine document. It states, inter alia, in Article 20, the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual are inherent and not granted by the state. These rights cannot be revoked by any government. They are not at the disposal of those who happen to be in power, to be granted or to be taken away. They are inalienable. To give some examples of human rights, Chapter 4 of the Constitution of Uganda mentions life, personal liberty, protection from inhumane treatment, protection of your home and property, right to a fair and speedy hearing, and freedom of expression. Fortunately, many constitutions have similar provisions, but as we all know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We are all very much aware that the persisting COVID-19 pandemic has created additional challenges for human rights in the world, also here in Uganda. We have all heard the news of dramatically increasing numbers of cases of domestic violence, especially against girls and women, and of teenage pregnancies because of the lockdown measures and schools being closed to prevent the pandemic from spreading further. This is truly appalling, and it makes me really sad. Also, when I think of how many girls are now deprived of a self-determined future. This Human Rights Day raises awareness on such alarming developments and calls for the prevention and elimination of all forms of violence against girls and women. We all need to be vigilant, individuals and especially institutions, taking up the cause of defending human rights. They need to be strong, these institutions. They need to be effective. This is a day to reflect on both our individual and collective responsibilities in strengthening human rights. Closing schools in order to prevent the virus from spreading further has been practiced all over the world. But this has been done at a high price, at the expense of the right to education. Education is a central tool for reducing inequalities, poverty, and a tool for strengthening socio-economic resilience and well-being. Children in Uganda have been out of school far too long. I'm therefore looking forward to their return at the beginning of next year, a step that enables them to exert their right to education again and gives them back a perspective on their future. Restrictive COVID-19 measures have been crucial for the decrease of the number of infections. Yet, the enforcement of these measures during the first lockdown sometimes went too far and produced severe violations of human rights, including the violation of the right to life and physical integrity. And there was no visible accountability for those committing these violations. It is very important to find a balance between enforcing rules that mitigate a severe pandemic and the respect for human rights. 2021 was the year of the presidential elections. The commemoration of the Human Rights Day also helps us not to forget those who were killed in the run-up to the election day, those who suffered torture, and those who are still missing. We can only learn from these painful experiences and work together towards ensuring peaceful elections in the future. Let me emphasize the pivotal role civil society organizations play for the promotion of human rights. They support remote communities, foster education, health, women empowerment, and fundamental areas like access to water and electricity. They contribute to social cohesion, reduction of inequalities and poverty. I am glad to find a very diverse civil society landscape in Uganda and appreciate its contribution not only to the promotion of human rights, but also to the development of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, in my perception, Uganda is on the way to strengthening human rights. For example, just this week, 2 men were held accountable for killings during the riots in November of last year. That is a good start. And the Judiciary has lately been given more personnel to tackle the huge backlog of cases it must handle. Our common goal is the uncompromising respect of human rights here in Uganda, in Germany and everywhere in the world. Germany, through the German implementation agency GIZ, which I thank for its help in organizing this event, stands ready to continue its support in developing strong institutions capable of defending human rights in Uganda. Thank you very much for your attention.
Being here, and that was the ambassador of Germany to Uganda, His Excellency Matthias Schauer. And from his remarks, he does bring a conversation on what do we consider to be fundamentally right and what do we consider to be fundamentally wrong, because we did see COVID-19 happening, and of course we had to come to we had to put in place different measures, the closure of schools, but against the right to education. So this is a conversation that we're going to have, and we do ask you once again to join us on our social media platforms and send us your thoughts. We move on now to a recording that we did capture from Mr. Robert Kochan, who's the country representative of OHCHR, and I want us to quickly get into it so that we quickly get into a conversation.
Human Rights Day 2021, theme Equality, message by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, 10 December 2021. The past 2 years have painfully demonstrated the intolerable cost of soaring inequalities. Equality is at the heart of human rights. That does not mean we must all look the same, think the same, or act the same. Quite the opposite. It means that we embrace our diversity and demand that all be treated without any kind of discrimination. That no matter who we are, who we love, or where we live, we have equal opportunities to live in dignity and to pursue our dreams. That from the moment we are born, anywhere on this planet, we have the same right to life, health and education, to speak our minds without fear, to enjoy our days in a healthy environment, all of us. Equality is about empathy and solidarity, about understanding that as a common humanity, our only way forward is to work together for the common good. But the inequalities inflamed by COVID-19 are pushing us backwards. It is about time we push back and bring them down. On this Human Rights Day, I invite you to join me in lending your name and your efforts to equality so that we can recover better, fairer, and greener from this crisis, so that we can rebuild societies that are more resilient and sustainable, so that we can stand up for human rights for all.
For human rights. Once again, that was Mr. Kochan, that is the country representative or in the office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. I do want to quickly again remind you of a topic today, the theme of the year on the international scene. We want to see how we can reduce inequalities, advance human rights. But on the national level, our theme is rebuilding better, resilient institutions, key to COVID-19 recovery. What are some of the key institutions that we can actually focus on so on, to see that we recover from this COVID-19 pandemic that we still do not know when it is going to go away. Now, recently we did cover a story on the Human Rights Commission picking their thoughts on the different thoughts they had on the right to vaccination. And I want to quickly invite the Human Rights Commission chairperson, Miss Mariam Wangadia, who is the chairperson of Human Rights Commission, to give us her very key remarks as we kickstart this conversation this morning. Over to you.
Thank you, NTV. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany, the UN Resident Coordinator, the representative of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, the Honorable Principal Judge, the Chairperson of the Human Rights Committee of Parliament, civil society organizations, the media fraternity, and fellow countrymen and women. On behalf of the Uganda Human Rights Commission and on my own behalf, I welcome you all to this e-dialogue in commemoration of the International Human Rights Day, which is marked every 10th December. The international theme for this year is Reducing Inequalities, Advancing Human Rights. The national theme is Rebuilding Better, Resilient Institutions Key to COVID-19 Recovery. I'm grateful to our partners and specifically to the UN Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights for enabling us to have this very important discourse surrounding human rights in Uganda. Mr. Kochani, if you are still on, Big Sister is very grateful. The celebrations this year come within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has affected not only the way we work, but every facet of our lives. It has been challenging to deal with emerging human rights issues in the midst of the battle to preserve life. As a commission, we applaud the efforts that the government has made to ensure that all eligible Ugandans are immunized against COVID-19, as well as access food and adequate health care, particularly for vulnerable persons. I reiterate here that refusal or neglect to be immunized is not a human right. It is a show of irresponsibility, and I want to urge all Ugandans to go to the vaccination centers and be vaccinated. We have also expressed concern about the terrorist attacks in the recent past, and we commend the security agencies for their rapid and continuing efforts to restore lasting peace in the country. We, however, urge them to be mindful of their constitutional duty to observe human rights in the performance of their duties as provided in Article 221 of the Constitution. In line with today's theme, I wish to make a strong appeal to government to fully fund the Uganda Human Rights Commission to ensure that it is enabled to effectively deliver on its mandate. I have received assurances from the learned Attorney General and the Right Honourable Speaker of Parliament of this commitment, for which I'm very grateful. I request the Right Honourable Prime Minister to also support this position. As we work to rebuild the economy following the COVID-19 period, observance of human rights is critical. I'm aware that the Right Honourable Prime Minister is a strong advocate for human rights, as seen from her engagement in the communities among vulnerable persons like the refugees and displaced persons. There are many other emerging threats to enjoyment of human dignity, such as climate change, terrorism, human trafficking, and domestic violence, specifically against children, which ultimately hamper attainment of achieving a middle-income status as a nation. It is my hope that even as government implements the parish model, it will support the Uganda Human Rights Commission to execute its mandate of civic education, to raise the awareness of all Ugandans, particularly at the grassroots to enable them to understand their duties, rights, and responsibilities as citizens. As a commission, we reiterate our commitment to protecting and promoting human rights for all Ugandans. The Wangadia-led commission will prioritize group rights, such as the right to health, the right to education, the right to peace and national security, and other social and economic rights without neglecting individual rights. I hasten to add that the Wangadia-led commission is a pro-victims commission and not a pro-suspected criminals commission. I recall with discomfort the many cases I had in the tribunal many years ago as a member of the commission, where the complainants appeared before me in yellow uniforms and escorted before me by prison warders. Upon inquiring about this seemingly strange scenario, I learned that at least 3 of them were convicted robbers and the others convicted defilers of girls below 7 years. Their complaints before me were alleged violation of their rights to personal liberty and to freedom from torture and cruelty. Looking back today, I regret the hefty damages I awarded these men. I feel at that moment I reopened the wounds of those victims of defilement and aggravated robbery. The true victims, which the new commission will put at the center of our work, are the victims of crimes committed by some of the complainants who ran to us. Our key message is rights go hand in hand with duties and responsibilities, including the duty to be law-abiding and to respect the rights and freedoms of others. It is our hope that through this discourse we shall, 1, bring together key stakeholders to dialogue on the state of human rights in the country amidst the COVID-19 pandemic challenges and suggest areas of improvement in rebuilding resilient institutions going forward. 2, to provide a platform for key stakeholders to share their achievements, challenges, and strategies on how to improve the realization of human rights in their respective institutions during the current COVID-19 recovery period. 3, to reflect on the human rights that have been most affected during the COVID-19 pandemic and provide synergies to demand accountability and action for intervention and improvement from duty bearers. 4, to empower the general public to know their rights, duties, and responsibilities through awareness creation. 5, to enhance the advocacy for mass vaccination against the coronavirus. I invite the public to join the conversation on the various online and digital platforms as a way of ensuring your participation in the commemoration to make your voices heard. Thank you for listening to me, and to you, NTV, thank you for being a true partner to the Uganda Human Rights Commission.
So much for being here this very morning. That was Ms. Mariam Wangadia, who is the chairperson of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, speaking to us and, of course, bringing in a number of things that we should be reflecting on this International Day of Human Rights. You as a citizen, for example, do you know your rights? Do you know when they're being violated? Do you know the office to go to when some of your rights are violated? But again, it is a time for us to reflect on the different human rights that have been affected immensely during this COVID-19 period. And we do have a panel of speakers here, and we'll be diving into that conversation in a bit. But I want to quickly invite once again Mr. Robert Kochan, who is the country representative of OHCHR, and he will be speaking and representing the UN resident coordinator, Her Excellency Susan Ngonji Namondo. Thank you so much for being here. We had listened to you much earlier, and now you come in a different capacity. But again, we're excited to hear your remarks on behalf of Her Excellency. A very good morning once again, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, and I hope you can hear me. Very good. So, big sister, I'm sorry, I'll talk after you. And this is the message that I'm reading on behalf of Mrs. The AXI, Mrs. Susanna Namondo. The Secretary General, message for Human Rights Day, New York, 10 December 2021. Our world is at crossroads. The COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, and the expansion of digital technology into all areas of our lives have created new threats to human rights. Exclusion and discrimination are rampant. Public space is shrinking. Poverty and hunger are rising for the first time in decades. Millions of children are missing out the right to education. Inequality is deepening, but we can choose a different path. 73 years ago today, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The principles set out in this simple declaration remain the key to realizing of all human rights, civil, economic, cultural, social, and political for all people everywhere. Recovery from the pandemic must be an opportunity to expand human rights and freedoms and to rebuild trust. Trust in the justice and impartiality of laws and institutions. Confidence that a life of dignity is within reach. Faith that people can get a fair hearing and resolve their grievances peacefully. The United Nations stands for the rights of every member of our human family. Today and every day, we will continue to work for justice, equality, dignity, and human rights for all. Happy Human Rights Day. That was the message of the UN Secretary General. I thank you.
Thank you so much for representing the UN Resident Coordinator, Her Excellency Susan Ngonji Namondo. Thank you, Mr. Robert Kochan, and for being here, and first of all, for being a key person in the fight for human rights in Uganda. Now, we want to quickly invite the Principal Judge, Honorable Justice Sekana Musa, who's joining us on Zoom to give us their presentation on the judiciary's role in ensuring that every Ugandan citizen has access to any office that they would first of all want to get to once their human rights are violated. But again, in the last couple of years, we've seen a number of complaints on the judiciary, you know, the backlog and the like. So we want to quickly pick your thoughts on that as we celebrate today. Over to you. I want to believe that you can hear me and also you can see me, Honorable Justice Sekana Musa. Honorable Justice Sekana Musa, we are waiting to hear from you. I hope you can get with us. But as we wait for him, the international theme this year is reducing inequalities, advancing human rights. And on the national level, we are looking at rebuilding better, resilient institutions that are key to COVID-19 recovery. We want to dive into this conversation, and we do ask you as we celebrate International Human Rights, use the hashtag Human Rights Day, UG21, and stand up for human rights. Very interesting hashtags. Choose the one that actually speaks to you more, but most importantly, let us in on the different aspects that you think have been respected, have been violated. I trust that we'll be able to, at the end of this conversation, to come up with ways to solve these violations as soon as possible and see that every Ugandan is happy about where they are. Over to you, Honorable Justice Sekana Musa. What is the judiciary doing and what does this day mean to them?
I think the judiciary is coming up with new strategies of ensuring that there is access to justice to all Ugandans in every part of the country. And among the things that have come in handy, and especially during the challenge that came around with the COVID, were ensuring that the courts remained open, because in spite of the fact that we're in a lockdown or we're in hard times of COVID, the people needed to access the courts. So the courts remained open with restrictions to ensure that any person who wishes to challenge anything that is being done during that time can access the courts. Of course, there were challenges by some actors. Lawyers were complaining that they could not they were not given clearances to move, but those who could access the courts within their jurisdictions ably filed matters, and we were able to attend to them. So it's known that the country went into a lockdown, a legal lockdown, that no courts were operational. We remained operational. We remained operating from our homes, delivering judgments, and hearing those urgent matters like habeas corpus, bail applications, especially those which involved prisoners in Luzira, where we have a video conferencing link that they can easily be had. It was a challenge in other areas where it wouldn't be possible because of the SOPs, which required parties to always be at a distance. The courts have ensured that all the available positions are now filled up, and that's really an encouragement, because every sub-county now is supposed to have a magistrate to ensure that so I think there needs to be accessed in every constituency. So every constituency in the country, that's a sub-county, will definitely have a magistrate's court. And then an expansion will be extended to all districts, will have a chief magistrate to address the issues of a district. And there are 140, they are yet to be filled, but there is a plan to have all of them filled. And then further recruitment in order to address the backlog is on the way. And currently we've just recruited 96 magistrates to ensure that this is implemented and it moves away from paper to action.
If you were to explain to us better on the assessment of the effectiveness of mechanisms that are made available, I think we can't seem to hear each other. We can't seem to hear each other right now, but we want to pick your thoughts on the assessment of the effectiveness of the different mechanisms that you've put in place in delivering to Ugandans during this COVID-19 period. Remember, the theme, we want to build back better to ensure that we all recover from COVID-19. Once again, speaking to Honorable Justice Sekana Musa, who is joining us online, and he is the principal judge at the Judiciary. But again, we lost you, but we hope we can quickly get you back online and pick your thoughts on the assessment of the effectiveness of the mechanisms that are currently available to Ugandans to actually access the services they need in the context of COVID-19. Over to you, Honorable.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, the different mechanisms, I think the Chief Justice came up with guidelines on how to leave the courts open, and this included ensuring that we go electronic in most of the things. Parties were allowed to file written submissions and send them via court's email. All the courts got email addresses which could be accessed during the lockdown. And that ensured that we could easily even deliver a judgment while at home without even necessarily being in a courtroom. That has simplified the access to justice. And we've already launched the ICMIS, which will enable the parties to be able to file from their homes. That's the greatest development that we are looking at, which is going to be a game changer in access to justice in Uganda. Once a party has his documents ready, he can easily file, pay online, file online, and the allocation of the case could be done straight away at that stage. So those are strategies which are available, which will be used to ensure that the public accesses justice in Uganda.
But again, just to pick your thoughts on the recent address, we did hear from President Yoweri Museveni saying that there's need to deny bail to all those caught in capital offenses, the capital offenders. What are your thoughts on that, denying bail to anyone that has done something related to capital offenses? I mean, is that not taking away their rights?
No, I think there is usually a mix-up. You see, there is no right to bail, but there is a right to apply for bail. And granting the bail is at the discretion of the court or the judicial officer. But I think the issue that His Excellency is raising is more of maybe how we exercise our discretion. maybe is not happy with how the courts or judicial officers exercise their discretion. And of course, it has a bearing on that presumption of innocence.
So moving ahead, I think we are losing you there again, but I still want to pick your thoughts on this because it's been a conversation that most people have been engaged in and are very interested in knowing the right to apply for bail. And you do say that it is actually there and it goes back to the courts. But again, how moving ahead, we're getting into 2021, is this something that as the judiciary you're considering, or you're simply going to streamline the way you issue out these different bails to the offenders? I hope I can still get you on Zoom.
I can hear you, but the issue that there is, the courts, we apply the law as it is. Currently, the Constitution gives the courts the power to exercise their discretion and grant bail until that is amended. So whichever proposals that are coming up will have to come in form of an amendment to the Constitution. Before then, the current position or status of the law is the courts exercise the discretion to grant or not to grant bail. The reservations His Excellency has will have to be addressed through an amendment or an amendment of the Constitution and other available laws. That would be the position at the moment. So we wouldn't speculate. It may be dropped, it may be taken forward, but as courts, we apply the law as is. We will not get into the speculation of what if this happens. Until when it has happened, that's when we shall address ourselves to the existing law as it would be then.
I will start with you again before I let you go. The aspect of backlog, you know, case backlog, there are people that have been on remand per se and haven't gotten access to a fair hearing. Is there any sort of compensation for them? Because at some point they'll feel that their right to fair hearing is being violated. Is there something you're doing with this backlog that we've been hearing in the past couple of years?
As the courts normally don't, we have not had those cases, even if someone has spent a lot of time on, maybe if he tried to enforce his rights, later to file a suit to claim that actually when I was arrested, I spent 5 years on remand without being tried. But we have to bear in mind that we are constrained because we don't have enough manpower. Backlog is because we don't have enough human resource. But currently it is a priority of the government. At least we've had the recent appointment of over 90 magistrates to ensure that they get all the sub-counties. Currently, there are interviews which are going on for judges of the High Court, about 14 of them. And there is a program to, at least they've approved the 80% threshold, a bare minimum of the High Court. And currently, we are about 55. So that will be a big push in addressing the backlog. But we are constrained, and even the people on remand, there are issues which cannot go beyond, because there are many stakeholders. We have the DPP and the police, and sometimes without sufficient manpower in all the other departments, we equally get constrained because there might be a judge, but there may be no prosecutors. So that will also add to the backlog or the problem of backlog. There wouldn't be prosecutors to prosecute the cases before the court. So I think it would be up to the government to ensure that all the human resource in the different stakeholders, police and DPP, also the public prosecution, is also given enough manpower to ensure that the backlog issue is tackled in a wholesome manner.
Thank you so much, Honorable Justice, and for giving us your thoughts on how the judiciary is trying to ensure that every Ugandan enjoys their basic human rights. You too can send us your comments on what the judiciary is doing and what you think it should be doing better to see that every Ugandan enjoys their basic human rights on our social media, of course, on NTV Uganda on Facebook and NTV Uganda on Twitter, and do use the hashtags that we've already posted. Now, allow me to invite the chairperson of the Human Rights Committee of Parliament, Honorable Fox Odoi. You have been the Member of Parliament for West Budama North East and also once again the chairperson of the Human Rights Committee of Parliament. He is joining us on Zoom, and I know the Committee on Human Rights is a recent creation. We want to understand the value that it brings to the fight of ensuring that human rights are respected in this country. Over to you, Honorable Foxadoy.
I have a written speech to read from because I was invited to participate in a conversation, and I'm going to handle this by way of conversation. Parliament has three core functions. So to address the role of Parliament in the enhancement of human rights, you have to look at the three core functions of Parliament. The core functions of Parliament are legislation, appropriation, and oversight. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Honorable?
You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So, you know that Parliament...
We are losing Honorable Foxadoy.
Through its committee, inquire to all human rights issues in Uganda, and also to look into human rights issues in every business of Parliament. If a law is introduced in Parliament by government, the Human Rights Committee is required by the rules of procedure to point out whether or not it conforms to the human rights standards laid out in Chapter 4 of the Constitution of Uganda, whether or not the particular legislation or activity conforms to our international commitments, the several international human rights commitments that Uganda is a signatory to, the regional instruments and the continental instruments. And every time there's appropriation, when a budget is brought to Parliament, the committee inquires into how that particular appropriation, that particular budget addresses human rights issues. I'll give you an example. We have just passed a 4 trillion supplementary budget. The 4 trillion supplementary budget is meant to address the challenges of COVID. We gave the government of Uganda money for the purchase of vaccines, ambulances, and sundries required by the Minister of Health to address the challenges imposed on the country by COVID. The last function of Parliament is oversight. In exercising the function of oversight, we are required as a committee to visit prisons, to visit health centers. My committee has just been in the districts of Mitiana, Mobende, and we are due to go to Intungamu, Fort Porto, Buteleja, and Tororo. And what we are looking at is health service delivery, access to health as a human right. And we want to know whether the lowest person in the villages has access to health services. That is a matter which is ongoing. The committee has also recently been to Kigo prison to assess whether or not the prison services conform to the UN minimum standards for the treatment of offenders and prisoners. We intend to carry out further visits to Luzira, to Kitalia, and all the regional imprisonment facilities. That is where we are. So to answer your question directly, the Human Rights Committee of Parliament adds value to the enjoyment and enforcement of human rights in Uganda. I thank you.
Well, from your conversation, pick the aspect that you've been interacting with different sections of society, you've been to hospitals, you've been to prisons. Your analysis of how the current state of human rights, what would you say is, and how are we doing as a country vis-a-vis the COVID-19 pandemic? And what should we be doing better?
When we visited Kigo prison, for example, we discovered that there are many prisoners. Actually, the exact number is well over 1,000 prisoners who have been on remand for periods beyond what is constitutionally stipulated. And that situation was aggravated by COVID. Of course, there are those who were there beyond the period, even prior to COVID. But the 2 years we have lost to COVID has aggravated the situation. Some of the prisons do not have e-links, so the prisoners cannot apply for bail. They don't have access to their lawyers. The trial, as the Honorable Justice Sekana has indicated, the courts remained open, but invariably slowed down to handling urgent matters. They slowed down to, and they did an incredible job just remaining open. We should applaud them for that. All I'm saying is that we should do better, because it's not acceptable that the human rights of an individual is abused for a day, and that goes unchallenged. We should get to a point where we have zero tolerance for abuse or breach of human rights. So I'm saying we can do better. We should and can do better.
Should and can do better. Thank you so much, Honorable Fox Odoi. He is the Chairperson Human Rights Committee of Parliament, giving us his thoughts on this committee that is fairly a new one, and we wanted to know the value that it is going to add to the latest fight to see that human rights in our country are actually respected. He says from their interaction they did see, a number of people staying on remand for more years than they should ideally be, and he feels that there's a lot that needs to be done to ensure that people's rights are not violated. Once again, you're here. We're celebrating the International Day of Human Rights, and we do ask you for every single conversation, do get to our social media platforms and share with us your thoughts on how we can better the current state of human rights. Now, ladies and gentlemen, do allow me to invite the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health, who is joining us on Zoom, Dr. Diana Twine. We do know that the Ministry of Health has done such a tremendous job during this pandemic, but we also know it has come under attack on several occasions. Now, in the most recent days, we've seen the Minister of Health, Dr. Jane Ruth Acheng, saying that they're going to put up an act that will see every single Ugandan gets mandatory vaccination. And we do want to start from there. What are your thoughts on that? Would you say this is the right way to go vis-a-vis the right to health, choosing what one should be allowing to be inserted or injected in their body? Over to you, the Permanent Secretary, Dr. Diana Twine. Thank you so much for joining us today on Zoom.
Thank you so much for organizing this e-dialogue, and especially touch the issues of human rights. I want first of all to say that when we discuss human rights, we need also to define that human rights must apply to everyone. If we are talking about, for example, vaccination, which you brought on board to discuss, vaccination, first of all, we brought the vaccines for every person to access. And these vaccinations are supposed to protect everyone. We know very well that if we do not vaccinate, we pose dangers to ourselves, but also to the people around us. Therefore, it is very necessary that everyone gets vaccinated to protect the people around us. If, for example, in Ministry of Health, we are saying, if you are not vaccinated, please don't come to our offices, because you pose a danger to us. And by the way, the Public Health Act also protects us, because it gives us also the mandate to ensure that we enforce the rollout, the vaccination, but also, of course, initially it was not mandatory. But we have seen that if we don't do that, then we'll not be able to defeat this disease that has caused catastrophic expenditures, has brought the economies on their knees. So it is, much as we talk about human rights, we need also to talk about other people's rights. Because if I refuse to get vaccinated, how then do you enforce the access or the human rights of the other people who are put to danger? So I think this is something that is in discussion. We have not been able to roll it out, but we do believe that once we have our Public Health Act amended, it will be able to address that issue. That's why we came up with immunization law. I mean, Immunization Act gives us mandate to enforce compulsory vaccination of all children, because we know that the children that are not immunized pose dangers to other children. And so if we are talking about children in school, all of us would want to take our children in school, and other children are not dangers to our children. And therefore, when we talk about human rights, we really need to look at universal health coverage, universal access to the services. But where people deliberately refuse to take the services, I think there must be a framework to make sure that we put a law to protect those that are endangered. So I think it is right that we look at enforcing this, not necessarily that we shall get people by force and vaccinate them, but we'll simply say, yes, you are not comfortable with the vaccinations, you are not convinced about the vaccinations and the safety of the vaccinations, please stay away. Don't bring your infection to the people around you, because you are a danger. And it is even becoming more relevant now when we are talking about COVID that keeps on changing. We are talking about Omicron right now, but tomorrow we'll be talking about Lambda. We'll be talking about something else, some other mutations that cause possibly a danger. The only science that we know and that has proven right over so many years is that vaccination helps to eliminate diseases. We have seen so many diseases in the history that have been eliminated only through vaccinations. And therefore, the issue of vaccinations, we do not have any shortcut. For COVID, we must vaccinate, we must talk about vaccination, we must stand up as one voice and speak for vaccination, because it's the only future, it is the only hope for our economy to open up, it's the only way that we are going to come back to normality. Thank you.
About 7.6 million Ugandans had received the vaccine, and we want to pick your thoughts on the different measures that you're putting in place vis-a-vis the need to respect human rights. And of course it is in relation to the previous question. Some people have actually said, how about you shift the lockdown onto individuals, the curfew onto individuals that are not vaccinated, so that they cannot access offices, they cannot access services, and that in a way will be, you're being fair to all sides, those that want to be vaccinated and those that do not want to be vaccinated. But again, how are you handling the challenges that are coming up with the COVID-19 pandemic, as in respect to the fundamental human rights, such as, access to education? We did see the ministry advising that schools be closed. What are your thoughts on that?
To put mechanism in place to safeguard the lives of Ugandans. And one of them was partial lockdown or total lockdown at the time when we had a lot of infection around. We remember that many lives were lost, and therefore that was an interim measure to make sure that we stop the spread, because we know very well that the spread was through human to human. The only way to interrupt the infection was to lock down. The same way we closed the schools. You remember very well at the time we closed the schools, the infection rate, and you know how many children were very sick. They took infections to their homes and actually ended up killing their parents or their grandparents. So the lockdown was one simple measure to interrupt infections. And this one, yes, to some people, they have politicized it, they've ridiculed us, but in the long run, our measures have paid off. When you look at the lives lost in so many other that are so-called human rights observers and all that, you have seen that there is a relationship between lockdown and strict measures and less lives lost. And for us, there is nothing that measures to life than what we did. Because if we just say human rights, people should be allowed to move and have freedom, but if that is posing a danger to the lives of the people, then the state has also the mandate to protect. It is a measure to protect the people. Even the schools that we closed, it was actually a measure to protect their children, but also to protect the parents that were directly affected. And I'm very, very optimistic. Now we are very optimistic that once we have a significant coverage of vaccination, and many more people, especially the vulnerable people, are vaccinated, the schools are going to open, even in the face of multiple mutations that we are going to see. And I want to tell you that we are going to experience many more. The Omicron good thing is that it is not as lethal as Delta. We have seen even the people we tested at the airport, and we found that they had that variant, and we followed them up. They are symptomatic. They never got symptoms. They were not even infective because they were isolated. And so we continue to impose these public health measures. It is in the interest of everyone. Therefore, that has a direct linkage with observing the human rights. Although some people interpret it as overstepping on people's freedoms, and people cannot do this, people cannot socially, enjoy. But we have to live in the new normal. We cannot just continue talking about human rights without looking at the impediments to the enjoyment of those human rights by other people who are affected. So we really need to look at an entire picture. We came up with SOPs, and these SOPs, each category of groups, we help them to make the SOPs. Different groups, we have their SOPs. The only problem is that even as we talk about human rights, we need to also understand that we have to take personal responsibility. We have to take personal responsibility, because we cannot just say we shall not be negligent, and then at the end, after all, we are talking about human rights. No. Human rights is relative. We must also, when it imposes other people's lives or put other people's lives in danger, then those people also have their human rights. Therefore, we need really to look at that in that perspective. But also as government, we have really tried to make sure that we get closer to universal health coverage. We signed up on universal health coverage, and so we do believe that whatever we are doing right now, whether equipping our hospitals, whether increasing the number of human resources, whether we're making sure that we bring nearer services to the people, all those measures meant for the human resource, human rights access. Thank you very much.
Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health. We'll probably be getting back to you later just to ask on the ways that you're currently strengthening these institutions to see that they're better prepared for more to come, which is we are still not very aware. Ladies and gentlemen, you're still watching us here. It is the International Day of Human Rights, and like I mentioned earlier, we are celebrating it under the theme. The international theme is reducing inequalities that of course we've seen come up even further with the COVID-19 pandemic. Advancing human rights and a national theme here in Uganda is rebuilding better, resilient institutions key to COVID-19 recovery. So be part of this conversation and use the hashtag Human Rights Day UG21 and stand up for human rights. Do be part of this conversation. Send us your thoughts on our social media platforms, NTV Uganda on Facebook and NTV Uganda on Twitter. We'll be waiting to hear some of those and of course throw the questions to our speakers. We'll take a short break and we'll be back shortly. Rebuilding better, resilient institutions key to COVID-19 recovery. You're still with me, Sandra Twinoblio, and we've had great speakers earlier joining us on Zoom, getting us in the know of why we should be celebrating International Human Rights Day and the key things that we have so far done, for example, as a ministry, you know, as the government, as legislators, what has so far been done to see that the human rights of Ugandans are actually respected. And I want to bring this conversation in our studio. We did start with the online conversation, but we are bringing it back here now in our studio. And in studio with me, we do have Kano Deo Karikona, who's the head of Directorate of Human Rights. He is seated right in the middle. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you being here, and we're just curious to hear from you on how the UPDF is handling the latest COVID-19 pandemic and moving ahead. What should we expect? I mean, we've had reports of the UPDF taking on roles that it shouldn't be taking part in, so we want to dive into that conversation. We also have Honorable Medi Mulumba, who is the member of the commission, and we do thank you so much for being here. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. We appreciate your presence. And we also have Mr. Samuel Nsubuga, the CEO, Africa Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. I want us to quickly dive into this conversation, and I want to throw it to Kano Deo Karikona. Give us your general status of how the UPDF, for example, is dealing with the COVID-19 vis-a-vis the human rights as we celebrate today.
Good morning, viewers. Let me start with the celebration of the International Human Rights Day. As the UPDF, we have a very strong attachment to human rights, historically. So we feel proud to be invited to be part and parcel of this celebration. As the Uganda People's Defense Forces, of course the People's Army, we were central in the fight against COVID, and you saw us assuming some roles which are not traditional. Yeah. And it was all in the fight for preservation of life. We assumed the role of supporting other sister forces in the enforcement of law and order. And before I even get there, I want to remind the public that COVID-19 posed a lot of challenges, not only to Uganda, but to the international world. And of course, UPDF was not exclusive, or Uganda was not exclusive in this. We had challenges, of course, during the enforcement, and it was a test to the peace that we had enjoyed for more than 3 decades in Uganda. People were not used to some of these things of being required to put on masks. True. People would go and drink till morning. It was their luxury to sleep in bars. People were not restricted on how many people should be on a border. So these were challenges really to the peace that we had really ushered in and protected for the last 30 years. So it was a challenge in its own. And as a UPDF, we picked a lot of lessons. The non-traditional roles that we played during the enforcement of COVID have made us stronger. We have picked lessons from that. I want to give the most recent example of an otherwise non-traditional role that we are playing. Let's talk about the most recent example of the Interagency Joint Task Force. It was led by General Chand at first, later General Soke. You had the most recent brief on Omicron. It was made by Colonel Chove, the doctor. So we have become stronger. We have acquired more skills in the fight against COVID. And we have also, of course, drawn lessons from the way we executed our tasks when COVID was at its peak. Of course, being a new situation, we had some excesses by individuals. And let me also remind the public that human rights is just genetic to Uganda People's Defense Forces. It draws back from the NRA struggle, where we had a very strict code of conduct, the operational code of conduct, which has now been codified into the Uganda People's Defense Forces Act as a schedule, which is the code of conduct. So we have a very strong attachment to human rights. So during the execution of our functions during the COVID time, we faced some challenges. Yeah, we had some excesses by individuals, which we are addressing, of course, seriously. You know, our zero tolerance policy to corruption. And secondly, we have created awareness now. Yes, mass awareness of the troops, both here and out of the country, to ensure that COVID-19 is fought completely. And we have also gained some other expertise. Our doctors now were sent to assist our colleagues in Mulago and other places, where we have also gained more expertise. Even when you refer to the airport today, we even have our own troops there, medics participating in the COVID-19 tests. So we have created awareness. We have created now resilience institutions. We have acquired more expertise. And the UPDF is strong now. All troops are vaccinated, and we are good to go.
In regards directly to human rights, you mentioned a few of the mechanisms and programs that you've put in place to, to strengthen the institution. But again, what are those deliberate programs that you have as the UPDF, to encourage the people within the institution to respect the basic human rights of Ugandans?
As the Uganda People's Defense Forces, we are proud and privileged to be having a commander-in-chief. We all know that the president of Uganda is the most busy citizen in this country, but he takes off time to give us guidance. When he's giving guidelines on human rights and security concerning torture and dealing with the riotous crowds, we are extracting orders. From me, I'm looking at the commander-in-chief. So recently he gave instructions, plus the previous ones, and we extracted what is pertinent to us. Now, if I am talking as a director of human rights now, there are so many interventions that we have put in place to alleviate the breach of human rights. One of them is the mass sensitization of troops about issues of human rights. I wish to tell you that just last week I flew in back from AMISOM in Somalia, where I spent almost 10 days. The leadership gave me the opportunity to go and talk to troops on issues of human rights. I've also been to Mountain Division, that is in Toroko, Kasese, Bundibujo, all those areas where I met an entire division with a human rights specific message. There is what is now popularly known as the ideological orientation courses. This is now spread all over the forces, and we are aiming at achieving conscious discipline.
Sure.
We are appealing to individual consciousness, institutional consciousness, and national consciousness. We want a soldier who is capable of self-policing.
Sure. We
have also strengthened other institutions, judicial institutions. We just have an example of yesterday, which His Excellency was alluding to, of those soldiers who were tried in division court-martial in Kachiri. We have also now strengthened the principle of accountability. Should there be a transgression of the law, accountability must follow. We must put you to the institutions. You must answer for your deeds. We are popularizing the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, which is a new law meant to emphasize human dignity. The Human Rights Enforcement Act, Chapter 4 of the Constitution, are some of the things that we are emphasizing during our our activities. We have also strengthened partnership with other protection partners. Mr. Nsubuga here can bear me witness. We have made a lot of partnerships in spreading information about torture. We have shared a lot of information, and we still have so many joint activities that are coming out in the protection of and ensuring of human dignity. So there are a lot of interventions that are in place, and given the guidance of His Excellency the President, we are good to go. We have only, when he gave the instructions, which for us became orders, we decided to strike the ground running. So we doubled our efforts. You remember His Excellency was saying he was going to launch an educational campaign about awareness. So one of them is we make sure that everywhere we go, where we are talking about human rights, we distribute copies of the directives of the President, we distribute copies of the Constitution, the PPTA, the Human Rights Enforcement Act, so that people are aware, troops are aware about the importance of respecting human rights, the importance of human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colonel Deo Karikona, who's the head of the Directorate of Human Rights at the UPDF. Thank you so much. We'll be coming back to you to get your thoughts on the general theme this year. I want to now move on to Honorable Medi B. Mulumba, who is the commissioner, member of the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And I want us to reflect more on the fact that 2021 had, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, and it had elections happening as well. And we did see in the two scenarios, we had a number of violations that were clearly seen. However, of course, as a commission, you do boast of the president coming forward and saying, criticizing all the security forces violating Ugandan citizens' rights. But we want to hear from you. Aside from that, if you look at the general theme this year, what does it mean? What does it speak to you as an institution?
Thank you very much. Today, 10th December, we are celebrating human rights internationally.
Yes.
And this commemorates the day when the world embraced UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In these past 2 years, the world has been under attack by COVID-19. COVID-19 was novel, it was a new thing. It was something that nobody ever imagined, that the world could go into a lockdown where they say no more flying from one country to another country. It was a time when they said, no, everybody stay in your homes. When it had just started, it created so many challenges. We had the enforcement forces, enforcement group, the security agencies. Now, these ones were also scared. How do you handle somebody, suppose somebody has COVID-19? So at times we saw a lot of uncoordinated movement where they were even scared of these people coming near them, and everybody was scared of everybody. That is why now we are with masks. We said never shake, don't shake hands, you must sanitize. So everything became new. And now, in the first lockdown, we saw so many violations of human rights.
True. And
as a commission, we moved in. We started training security agencies how to observe human rights. And even though the coronavirus, people started realizing what coronavirus is, that maybe it wasn't as they were thinking it was. So we started having a call to humanism in us. Human rights is about just being humane to everybody, and to look at to see how we must help each other, to see how you do what you want to be done to you. And when we had that, we had so many rights that were affected. We had the right to education, where schools were closed, where we now started having child labor. You see so many young kids on the streets of Kampala hawking tomatoes, things like that at traffic lights in most cases. We saw child pregnancies. We also saw children being in the same class for 3 years.
Sure.
Now that right to education was affected in its own way. We had the right to health. The right to health was affected in a way that we got all the resources to be put in COVID-19, and you know we have so many other diseases. We have diseases like cancer, we have diabetes, we have HIV/AIDS. All those diseases somehow were neglected because most of the resources had to go to the novel disease that had just come in, and even the medics were scared. How do you handle these people if somebody, actually some of them ran away because you know you cannot, you are scared that when you handle this person with coronavirus, you may also take it back home.
Yes.
So
maybe because also their fellow personnel lost their lives. To
that's true. Actually, that's true. Actually, we are not blaming them that they did that, because it was. It became unsafe even to transport somebody you don't know. It became unsafe even to shake somebody that you know. You don't know where it's coming from.
Next to someone.
It's certainly, yes. And then we had the right. We had the right to work, which was also affected. Shops were closed, businesses were closed. Actually, some of them went under. And now, when we look at the theme, we must look at how are we going to create safety nets to absorb the shock, if such a shock happens. Because there are some people who are in business who will never go back to business because of coronavirus. We have revenue was lost at individual level and on national level. Government is not collecting taxes because people are not trading, and government must continue running. Actually, you get a situation where the public would say government should not tax them, but then how will government perform? It has to perform. So we had all those shortfalls, and as those shortfalls, those are some of the resiliency that we must see. How do we rebuild? How do we rebuild such things? Even the access to justice. Yes, the Honorable Sekana Musa was saying that they did something good. Actually, the e-justice is good, but you know it slowed down everything, because when somebody was taken to a village prison, he could not access bail.
True. Because
they didn't have the e-communication, and even the judges themselves, they could not move freely. You know, even if you're working at home, there's a book that you want which is in your office to read, to see how to correlate. And yes, and now the judiciary has somehow, it has started rebuilding itself when they say e-justice, because now that e-justice is not going to go back. And we believe that that's going to be, that's a good one. And as a commission, we are now looking more at the group rights. Yes. We are also looking more at sensitizing and educating people about human rights. You know, human rights should not be just looked at as something that is going to be given by government. Human rights, we should start practicing human rights in our homes. We should start, you know, here in Uganda, you see something, they say, a maid from hell. You see that what the maid was doing was torturing a kid, an infant. You are seeing a maid who is beating a 2-year-old. It is not unheard of to see a stepmother burning a stepson or stepchild. It's not unheard of to see a father beating his son because he stole 100 shillings. It's not unheard of to see so many injustices, so many. You know, if somebody can do that to his own flesh and blood, what is it that he can do to a stranger? So we must inculcate the spirit of human rights in our homes, in our institutions, and we must tell people that human rights starts with you or starts with me. So if everybody is observing human rights, then who will be violating human rights? So we are looking at civic education.
So everyone has a role to play.
Everybody has a role to play. The media has a role to play. You know, around this time, we had so many attacks of so many things. Now, for example, we have social media. Social media today, they say something, they can say something which is so outrageous. Tomorrow, they are not saying that. You don't know what. Actually, it is now very difficult even to know what is the truth and what is not the truth. Because, you know, I think the Ugandans are very much obsessed with breaking news, that they always breaking false news before you realize it. And when you don't go back to you don't know. For you, the breaking news was that, for example, there was a time of breaking news that Lumbuye was brought at 9 a.m. So it was New Vision, it was on the radios, it was on the TVs, it was on social media. Then they said, he has been taken to Gulu. You know, so and all those things are in this time. You know, people are stressed. You know what they said last time? Then they said he is in Turkey, but he's bored. He's in Turkey, he is bored. And you know, after saying all those things, you know, people are already stressed. I think it is important to educate Ugandans that, one, they should be mindful about what they are reporting. Two, we should try to observe human rights about everybody. You know,
well,
you look at.
You see, when you talk about educating Ugandans about human rights, you bring me to the question. You bring this question in my head. We know that your constitutional mandate is, of course, to hear cases of human rights violations, among so many other things. And I believe even educating the masses on human rights is your role. How would you gauge your performance so far?
Thank you. You know, the framers of the Constitution said, when they were creating, when they were putting in at Chapter 4, and when they were creating the Human Rights Commission, they said, never again should these violations occur. Okay?
Yes.
In their mind, they didn't say that, I'm going to get where you are. In their mind, they didn't say that never again should this violation occur and we don't compensate.
True.
But they wanted them not to occur at all. That is why we need civic education, to educate the citizens, to educate the duty bearers, and educate the right holders. Because we have duty bearers and right holders. 221, Article 221 of the Constitution enjoins security agencies to observe human rights. Now, in the Commission, we have the tribunal function. When you bring a report, we investigate, we hold tribunals, and we make decisions, we give compensations here and there. But now, in most cases, we are doing that to human rights violations by government. But do you know that we have so many human rights violations by individuals?
True. But the bigger question, especially the facts.
We have men who are killing their wives and cutting them into pieces.
Yes.
We have those who are banning their children, banning their stepchildren.
Children banning their parents.
Children banning their parents. We have so many. That's why we are saying, as a commission, yes, that function, by the way, we are not fully considered for some time, for around 1.5 years, ever since the late Kagwa, Mr. Kagwa passed on. But now we are fully considered and we are resuming the tribunal function. But I can tell you, the tribunal function has been functioning very well. We have been doing very well. And actually there, for example, I can also mention that at times we get complaints. And the commission, when we are doing our work, we are not very much into confrontation.
Yes.
We prefer to engagement. For example, at times we've seen where the EPDF officers have made mistakes, and we tell the EPDF, and they say, what is this? What happened? They go and investigate when they also see that it was true. We've seen them compensating so many people for some of the ailments of what their troops have done. And then in the same breath, we've seen them punishing those people, that they punish you. And you commend the EPDF, for example, when they sentenced the violators of human rights in Kakiri, I think it was yesterday, to life imprisonment and 35 years. You know, I don't know whether was it life imprisonment of 25 years or for their for their life. Okay, it's life imprisonment. That is a big statement. True. That you killed somebody because you had power, and now you're going for life. So we appreciate that.
It is setting the example.
It is setting the example, yes. Yeah. And that one, we commend them, and we commend all agencies. Even actually, when the president came up and said, don't torture people, we saw so many agencies coming up. Actually, some of them were doing their things quietly. For example, we saw the police. The IGP came and said, you know, we have so many officers who have been taken to the police standards unit to answer for their cases about human rights.
Yeah.
So we are seeing that in a way, we are moving together, and everybody, most people, are tired of human rights. Now that they're tired of human rights, we also want our communities, our societies, our places of work to start observing human rights. There's nothing better than human rights.
What are you currently doing to strengthen these institutions so that it performs its mandate properly?
No, we are doing, like, for example, right now the commission is fully constituted, so we are starting our enforcement arm, which is the tribunal function. We are going to resume, actually resuming in January, because it was fully considered in 2 months ago.
Yes.
Then we are doing civic education, and we are looking more at group rights as opposed to individual rights. By the way, some people misunderstand the commission. When we look at a violation, you see a violation on TV. We shall not come just for you and say, oh, now we have to compensate you. We can go and tell the institution which we saw violating that what you did was not right. We want this to be brought to book. And please, we don't want this to happen again.
Yes.
That is now, that is for the group. But then there's a situation where somebody, an individual, comes to the commission. When you come to the commission and you report, we look at your individual right. But when you come and report, we also want you to come, when you come and report, and they call you to go and make a statement and write a statement, you must come and write a statement. Some people come and report, and after reporting, they disappear. Some of them lose interest, some of them actually are compensated, and they just keep quiet. So yes, and then we don't entertain cases,
yes,
which are before.
But have you also had different sections of the public saying year in, year out, we do see violations, especially during the election period, and the commission does not effectively perform on seeing that their rights are respected? Have you had these comments from the public? And what are you doing about it?
We have seen this, and actually we even have an election report. Let me tell you what happens about when it comes to elections. When it comes to elections, you have a group outside which wants to come in at any cost. And you also have a group which is inside, which also wants to continue being inside. You are seeing violation. It is not that the violation is one way. The violation is two way, because you are seeing people.
I do not know what our other speakers today have to say in regards to that.
I'm trying to tell you that you will see it is like where you have the best defender and the best striker.
Yes.
The striker is saying, I must score. And the defender is saying, you don't have to score.
Let us move to Mr.
But wait a minute, I want also to clarify.
I want him to actually respond to this, because I think he will speak better to that.
Oh yes, I want also to talk about that. I'm still talking about that.
Yes.
In the recent elections, for example,
yes,
we have complaints. Which complaints we're investigating? If somebody's individual right was violated, we received complaints, we're investigating them, and we're going to make decisions about them. If there is a violation.
Ugandans are waiting to see.
Oh yes, and by the way, we have done so many. Even some of them they've been compensated. They've been compensated outside the commission mandate. Yeah.
All right, let us move to Mr. Samuel Herbert Nsubuga. You are the Chief Executive Officer of the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. During elections, we've seen a number of human violations, you know, and he does point out his very views on how the Human Rights Commission is performing. And I want us to start that conversation with you from there. Do you think the Human Rights Commission is doing its very best? From the civil society, you're always observing and seeing what is being done. Do you feel enough is being done?
Thank you very much, Sandra, my fellow panelists, viewers and listeners. Yes, we actually closely collaborate with the Uganda Human Rights Commission in the work we do. Let me just give an example now. As our mandate includes treatment and rehabilitation of survivors of torture, we develop medical reports when the survivors of torture approach us for treatment and rehabilitation. And these medical reports assist the Uganda Human Rights Commission in their tribunal hearings to award compensation. And also further, in addition to, now that is the civil route, in addition to the getting the criminal route of having the perpetrators of torture, cruel, inhumane treatment. The courts of law also use these reports. So, of course, there are still challenges in terms of punishing the perpetrators. We do not have many cases of perpetrators of human rights violations being punished.
Yes.
Yesterday was a good example. I mean, we have to give credit where it's due. That is a starting point. But we have a long way to go to ensure that many of these perpetrators of human rights violations are punished. We have more of compensation. There have been a number. I can give you two examples. In the murder of Assistant IGP Kawesi, each of the 22 suspects was awarded 80 million shillings compensation. But unfortunately, now the perpetrators of torture nothing has happened to them. Just recently, Honorable Zake was awarded 75 million shillings, but the perpetrators of the acts on him have not been punished, at least as we speak. So the challenges are there, but we continue to engage as a civil society with various institutions, the Uganda Human Rights Commission and the courts of law, to have the perpetrators of human rights violations punished.
But again, if you're to speak to us from where you stand as a civil society, we did see a number of civil society organizations being blocked. What are your thoughts on that? And as a civil society, don't you think this is sort of infringing on your basic right to actually voice out for the concerns of the people?
It's very unfortunate. The 54 organizations, I believe, are the ones you are talking about.
Yes.
Who were closed by the NGO Bureau. My take is that there should have been engagement with the Bureau, with one-on-one with these organizations, and to find out where the gaps are, and to give them timelines to comply. Which I believe was not done, because civil society organizations actually complement provision of services by the government, by the state actors. So closing 54 NGOs would actually affect what they call omuntu wa bulijjo wa wansi. It would be I would believe that what I know, they are engaging the NGO Bureau. We are still waiting to see whether they will be opened, or those who have complied to those gaps which they said, those requirements which they have not fulfilled, whether they would be opened. But we believe it was unfortunate that the 54 organizations were closed, especially at this point in time during this pandemic.
So you do believe that there should have been a series of discussions before they closed, because we have seen the civil society come through for different sections of the public, so closing them was probably such a blow to some of the beneficiaries. Yes,
even unemployment, those people are now unemployed. Yes. So for me, that's really one thing. There should have been engagement, dialogue, because as civil society, we do a lot of constructive engagements with ministries, departments and agencies in the work we do. As you know, as we deal with torture is a very sensitive matter.
Sure.
But we engage with the CANODEO, the UPDF, we engage the Uganda Human Rights Commission, we engage deeply with the police. We have joint training programs with them to work out all these issues, these mistakes, and to even learn from each other how best to have a better society.
Now, throughout the year, we have seen different pictures. I mean, you had mentioned of fake news as well. I know that contributes to that as well. But from where, again, you see it observing and working closely with the UPDF, the aspect of torture of suspects. What are your thoughts on that? Do we have a different way to get information from the suspects other than torture them? Or is it something we have to work with?
We do. We always advocate for more resources towards alternative investigative techniques.
Yes.
More resources towards a forensic lab, up-to-date forensic lab. The investigative agencies should tap into the national identification. NIRA has all our details, has our fingerprints. The training of the human resource, the detectives, we always advocate for more funds put in that area. Because believe you me, if all these crimes can be sorted out, because most of the people may be suspected for crime, would be sorted out without even resorting to unreasonable force or those resorting to torture. I believe because I mean you see it for us who have been around for quite some time. There were those detective series many years ago, Old Fox, Inspector Derrick, where you would see a crime being sorted out just by using forensics and interrogation, which does not amount to torture, and the crimes will be solved. So I believe more funds should be put towards the investigative agencies, and torture would be mitigated, would be history.
More funds should be. Can I throw this question to you, Kanodeo Karikona? Or do you think if we invest more in investigations, we shall do away with the violations that we see against suspects in this country?
Thank you, Sandra, again. Actually, it's not about thinking. For us, it is a presidential directive.
Yeah.
It is contained in that directive concerning torture. The President, His Excellency the President, told us the disadvantages of torture. He told us how torture comes out, saying it is coming as a result of laziness by some investigators. He's telling us its advantages of torture, and he gave ways in which we can use modern methods of investigation, science-based investigations. He talked about DNA, he talked about taking photos, and we are building a lot of capacity in this direction. And as I said, for us, it is a directive. It is an order from the President. It's an order from the Commander-in-Chief. So we take it seriously, and we have built a lot of capacity in this direction. Now, given sensitization, which I talked about in the past, we are moving towards that direction. The cases are now low as compared to the past.
I want to come back to you, Mr. Samuel Nsubuga.
Yes.
You are representing a number of civil society organizations today.
Yes.
If you were to rate how we are performing in regards to the respect of human rights as we celebrate International Human Rights Day, and not forgetting the COVID-19 pandemic that has brought in different changes and different challenges and different ways of doing life, how are we doing, and what should we be focusing on to get better moving ahead? A lot more is coming. We don't know how many variants are coming. How should we deal with the situation, and how, most importantly, are we doing as a country?
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. We have come a long way. We have come a long way. We have enhanced on the legal framework. 10 years ago, we did not have the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, which was passed in 2012. 10 years ago, we did not have a legal framework against torture specifically. What would happen is that crimes, it would be assault, grievous bodily harm, and this would not give a deterrent punishment. We have the Human Rights Enforcement Act, which gives individual liability to perpetrators of human rights violations, and we, of course, are still pursuing other laws. In particular, I should mention the witness protection law. Just a few days ago, Afande, the twin of the CID, actually also talked about having the witness protection law in place, because it would help those who have to speak out against these human rights violations, because there is a lot of fear When one is tortured or when they commit a human rights violation, after treatment and rehabilitation, we find ourselves that when we want to pursue justice for this person, he or she says, no, you have treated and rehabilitated me, let me go back and continue my work. Where will you be when the perpetrator of torture comes back for me?
Yes.
But with the witness protection law, it would really help. It would really help in having at least people speak out, even though it's not on a witness stand, but in camera. Of course, there are still challenges, but I believe with persistence, because these laws, we started on the Prevention and Prohibition Torture Act from 1997. It was passed in 2012. So these laws take time to be internalized and understood by the state, so that they are passed.
Yeah.
But one step at a time. We still, as I say, we still have challenges because we still have human rights violations in the country. We cannot pretend that they are not there, but we'll continue trying to get to the promised land.
I really caught your words. We still have human rights violations in this country, so we need to work harder.
Yeah.
But as we conclude this conversation, you did touch on the aspects of recommendations on how we can build in relation to our conversation, our theme, building better, resilient institutions. What are some of the recommendations that you would want us really to focus on, to reflect on today, so that we have a better Uganda moving ahead? And I mean, I've had people on social media say every day there's every year there's International Human Rights Day. It's year in, year out. But can we see progress? What are some of the recommendations, tangible recommendations that we can look at?
We need to continue creating awareness about human rights.
Yes.
And not only because, unfortunately, at times the focus is to our friends, the security agencies, on these issues, but even the public. And we need to translate all these documents into the local languages. Because at least the latest statistic is that only 3 million Ugandans understand English, 27 million Ugandans understand Luganda. So why don't we have all these human rights instruments and all these translated in the local languages? We translated the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act into Luganda, Swahili, Luo, Runyankore, Ruchiga, Karamojong, so that we have more of the Ugandans.
So you do agree that some people actually do not know that their rights are being violated?
Yes, they don't know. They don't know. They don't know. We really need to continue educating the public about these rights so that they understand them. And when they are violated, they know where to go to report, to report to the police.
Yes.
Even though the police may fear to report that, but the police actually has the widest coverage in the country to report to the Uganda Human Rights Commission, report to SCTV and other civil society organizations, so that these violations are documented. And then we can access justice from there using the laws which I've mentioned earlier.
What are your parting shots in a few seconds? A few seconds.
A few seconds. I would like to request the state. There are a number of recommendations because we are now going to Uganda is going to be reviewed.
Yes.
Reviewed in January next year. There are a number of recommendations which we have made. What happens? It's the review process is a state-led process, but the civil society organizations that develop a report, which is fed into the country report. And first of all, the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act implementation, to have the perpetrators of torture punished it needs to work better. It's not working better. Then I've talked about the Witness Protection Bill being passed into law. And third, the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, where it will allow other national and international organizations to visit detention centers, because it's only now the Uganda Human Rights Commission which has the mandate.
Yes.
As for now. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Samuel Nsubuga. In a second, Colonel Deons, want you to give us your parting shots as we close this conversation in just a few seconds.
One, Sandra, ironically, I wish to report to you that soldiers in the performance of their duties are also tortured.
Okay. So
we
their rights are also violated.
Major who was tortured, he was beaten and became unconscious.
Yes.
We have a sergeant who sustained a broken fracture. We have another one who lost an eye.
Yes.
So the public should be told that soldiers also have human rights.
Yeah, right.
We really didn't set out to go out there and be tortured like others.
Yes.
We are performing a noble duty, and we are proud of it, but our rights should also be protected. So they should also know that protection and enjoyment of rights is a reciprocal requirement.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Over to you, your Honorable Mehdi, your very last speaker today, and would like to hear your parting shots.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to talk about, I want to emphasize, because we are looking at the resilience after COVID-19,
yes,
to emphasize what Madam Atwine said. People should go for vaccination. When you talk about vaccination, we have categories of rights. We have the individual rights and the group rights.
True.
Group rights always override individual rights. And when you have rights, you don't think that there are certain things that you may call rights, but they're not rights. For example, you have your life and you have a right to life. But you cannot say that it is my right, I can go and kill myself. You don't have a right to kill yourself.
True.
You have a right. Actually, when you try to kill yourself and fail,
yes,
you are charged for attempting to murder somebody. So even this one, we must act responsibly. We must look at the group right of vaccinating, such that you keep everybody safe. Rights, your right end where others stop, other people's rights begin. So you don't just say that it is my right to do this or not to do that. Yes, Uganda has moved a long way, and of course, with the communication that is around, we see so many crimes being reported because it is easy, but we need to do more civic education. We need to look at the duty bearer and tell him what he's supposed to do. And right holder. Actually, like the colonel was saying, a soldier, a policeman, is a human being.
True.
Meaning that he has rights.
Yes.
Even you have rights. Everybody has rights, as long as you are a human being. So you don't just go and slap a soldier and say, this one has no rights.
Yes.
They have rights. And we must protect all our rights. I want to take this opportunity to thank our partners, to thank GIZ for their contribution, for us to be able to be here, UN OCHA, and all other defenders of human rights, our partners. Actually, all the group that we are with here, they are all partners.
Yes.
They are all defenders of human rights. When the military goes out there to enforce sanity and the law and order, they are enforcing human rights. Uganda, we have so many laws. We need now to start implementing these laws, and we need to do it in a manner that is orderly. We have seen at times people doing forum shopping. He comes to Human Rights Commission and reports a case. He goes to the Judiciary and reports a case. He goes to so many places and reports a case. The Human Rights does not entertain, one, cases before other judicial, other courts of judicature. Two, we don't entertain issues between international relations, and then we don't even entertain issues about prerogative of mercy. That's the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And then we wish you a very fruitful Human Rights Day, and human rights begins with you. It begins in your home, in your institutions, and in Uganda. I thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us in studio, and a very big thank you to all those that joined us online, our speakers that joined us online, and for you, the viewer that was watching us back at home. We do remind you that human rights do start with you, how you treat others and how later you expect others to treat you. Do keep this conversation on our social media platforms. A big thank you to all the partners that have made this day possible. But do remember that Uganda is yet to be reviewed in the Universal Periodic Review, and this is going to be the 3rd come January. So we wait to see, can we continue to talk about implementation other than having discussions that see no fruits? Let's continue to implement all the things that we have in these discussion rooms. Continue to enjoy International Human Rights Day, and let's keep this conversation and the fire burning. I've been your host, Sandra Twinovideo.